Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I am Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd about this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic.
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Bessie. Any trigger warnings this week?
This movie contains depictions of gun violence, alcohol abuse, domestic abuse, and racism. Sarah, is there anything you can think of that I may have unintentionally omitted?
I would also add that if you are hurt by dirty looks from the amazing actress Khandi Alexander, this is not the movie for you.
Spoiler warning, we are going to spoil everything, including works having nothing to do with Bessie that we may casually refer to. Consider yourself warned. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about the film Bessie and about Bessie Smith?
Yes, from our friends at the Wikipedia. Bessie is a 2015 HBO TV film about the American blues singer Bessie Smith and focuses on her transformation as a struggling young singer into the, quote, Empress of the Blues. The film was directed by Rees with a screenplay by Rees, Christopher Cleveland, and Bettina Gilwas, and also from an original screenplay by Horton Foote. Queen Latifah stars as Smith, and supporting roles are played by Michael K. Williams as Smith's first husband, Jack G., Monique as Ma Rainey, and several others. The film premiered on May 16, 2015. It was the most watched original HBO film in the network's history as of 2016. The film was well received critically, garnered 4 Primetime Emmy Awards, and winning for Outstanding Television Movie. Our friend Bessie Smith was born April 15th, 1894, and died September 26, 1937. She was an African-American blues singer widely renowned during the Jazz Age. As I mentioned, Empress of the Blues, and she was considered the most popular female blues singer of the 1930s, and she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989.
We chose Bessie as one of our Pride Month films because she was bisexual. This is frankly depicted in the film.
Great. A little bit about our source material. We pulled from an article from Slate called How Accurate is Bessie? And it looks like you read some books.
I read Bessie by Chris Albertson, and I read The Famous Lady Lovers by Cookie Woolner, which is about bisexuality and lesbianism among Black female singers in the early 20th century.
Let's go through some of the synoptic points of this film. We open on Bessie Smith, played by Queen Latifah, performing on stage under a really gorgeous blue light. And it's super evocative right away. We see her coming off the stage and walking into a lobby of the theater where her car is waiting for her inside the lobby, which to me, if you had to ask me today what I think success looks like, it's that. Not having to go outside. We immediately cut back to her as a little girl trying to open a refrigerator and hiding from a family member who is screaming at her. Then we see her backstage at a show almost being sexually assaulted, and she beats the guy up. And then she goes out on stage and sings like a boss. There's 2 things I want to point out right here. First of all, Queen Latifah is a really good actress. Second of all, right away in this film, we're having a hell of a time trying to figure out where we are and what is happening and what the timeline is. We have been shown at least 3 different timelines, maybe more.
I had a heck of a time figuring out what was happening in the flashback versus what was happening in the present, who the person yelling was, and what happened to the mother that led to the little girl getting blamed. When it cuts from that scene where she's being picked up, it says Alabama 1913, 14 years earlier. One of the things that goes on is, I don't know what year it is, stuff starts to look 20s early, but then they finally give you a newspaper that says 1921. If they were constantly having dates pop up, we'd say this is cliched, but we've seen examples of things that are able to subtly convey this. A world war happens and we aren't noticing. I'm unclear on when Prohibition starts. It's very hazy how much time is passing.
Worth noting, this movie is set on a truncated timeline, which we love, but because the movie doesn't do us much in the line of service of telling us what time it is, it's very difficult to tell what is flash forward, flash back, because the fashion is all very similar. The automobiles are very similar. I know when the Great Depression comes in any movie because I am seeing shuttered doors and people waiting online for things. And that happens in this film, but there's not a lot of tells as to what time it is, and that's immediately very disorienting.
This is something that can be subtly conveyed, and it's like they took out any information. She does say one thing here to this man that I like, where she said, I wanted to mess around. I didn't want to do all that. She knows what she wants.
She does. There's a lot to like about the way that Bessie Smith is written. I mean, this is the highest possible compliment here, because I'm going to get into my theories about the source material and the Franken screenplay that we're working with here. But I think that Bessie comes off like she's almost a villain in this movie, to the degree that she advocates for herself and the humanness that we see written in this. Kind of the role you would stereotypically see played by a man. I think that is all Rees doing in the writing of it, because it turns a formula on its head. But you know, as we just discussed, this timeline is indecipherable and it's frustrating. We see her with her lover, Lucille, who is a composite of Bessie's partners. Over time, there's, I think, 3 or 4 different women that were sort of included in Lucille. We also find out right away that Bessie is not the right kind of Black for the entertainment industry of that time period. She is not the right size, shape, or color for the vaudeville circuit. That is also interestingly portrayed. Someone holds up a paper bag and says, "You're darker than this. You can't be in this show."
This is a thing in the Black community. The paper bag test is a thing that people will refer to around acceptability in certain circles, where the idea was you had to be lighter than a paper lunch bag. I never picked up that the girlfriend's name was Lucille. I have her written down as girlfriend the whole time.
I picked it up because I was on the IMDb page. That is why I know that character's name. For someone who is so critical to who Bessie is, we learn very little about her, and the character is very remotely written. However, things get interesting in a hurry at this point for a little while, because she and her brother, who is her partner on the vaudeville circuit, go to meet up with Ma Rainey, who is played by Monique. Monique is amazing in this film, and there's not enough Monique. We're going to talk about Ma Rainey in a far less pleasant film, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, but I wanted all the Ma Rainey in this movie. What we did see of Ma Rainey was really fascinating, and I wanted to follow her. So Bessie steps into her train car, and Ma Rainey immediately pulls a gun on her. She tells her about the different types of the blues, and that Bessie has to figure out what kind of blues singer she is going to be. And we'll cover this as we cover more Black performers when we get to James Brown with Get On Up. You'll see here in this movie, and we'll see it in Get On Up, how forcefully Black artists have to advocate for themselves. it's a way that is often misconstrued and negatively positioned by the white people gaze. You know, as an example, James Brown used to demand cash payment up front, and he did that because white people were ripping him off. White people have historically ripped off creatively and financially from Black artists and athletes, and he had to protect himself. I've seen this positioned as a joke and as something really sleazy, and it's really about the fact that artists had to really protect themselves, and Black artists in particular. Ma Rainey shows here when she goes to negotiate with a theater owner that she is not going to back down from what her share is, and she's going to take her share. And it was really good to see that position from the Black artist's POV. Charles S. Dutton is in here for like a second as Pa Rainey. And it's not enough Charles S. Dutton for me, but we get to see him for a little bit as we see Ma negotiating. He travels with her and begins performing second build, and she starts to get to kind of the same level of charisma as Ma Rainey. It's a different kind of talent, and they get into a really uncomfortable fight. You know, and Ma Rainey says, "We're done here," and Bessie also says, "We're done here."
There is a fantastic scene where Ma is wearing a tuxedo and comes onto Bessie in the bar, and Bessie is like blown away, and Ma shows her how to go into men's spaces dressed as a man. And Ma couldn't be a better mentor or a better, this is where I'd like to be in 5 or 10 years. Latifah and Monique both have background at the Apollo, and there's about the same age difference between them as there was between Bessie and Ma Rainey. And yeah, Bessie steps in front of Ma on stage, which is not cool. Ma throws the fledgling from the nest.
It's a really uncomfortable scene because they're both right and they're both wrong. How they deal with each other, but ultimately it's Ma's show, and Bessie is incredibly ungracious to her and has to go. Bessie starts to get her own show together, and we see her auditioning women for her show, and she does a little shoes on the other foot business where she says you have to be darker than this paper bag. She's a big success really fast.
It's unclear how long is she traveling with Ma for, how soon after that first scene of her singing and getting underpaid does she run off with Ma. I'm unclear what year it is. I'm unclear how long it's taking her to put this together. Then here comes Jack G, played by Michael K. Williams. I love Ma. I love Chalky White. It was so fantastic to see him. Just getting more time with Michael K. Williams is a distraction from frustrations with the opaque timeline.
He's such a good actor, or he was such a good actor. It breaks my heart to see him on screen because he is so good. He comes in there and he just says, "I'm auditioning to be your man." And I gave my hand in front of my face and thought he was so damn charismatic and so handsome. He gets the job.
He pitches himself to her saying that she's the most beautiful woman that ever sang the blues, or any woman, period. On the first date, Jack pulls a knife on a man who comes on to Bessie. I had a note on bisexual erasure here. It was something that I'd heard years before, that bisexuals wind up kind of melting into whatever community, depending on who they wind up marrying. Female sexuality is fluid, and we like to see things one way or the other. Jack is a lot more okay with Lucille being around than the actual Jack was with Bessie's girlfriends and Bessie's male side pieces too.
Yeah. Another thing to the credit of this film and what you just said about bisexual erasure is that it doesn't do that. You know, it shows her going between these people and having serious relationships with both of them, and them serving different purposes in her life. And delivering on different needs. We see very quickly that Bessie was a woman of appetite. She liked to drink. She liked to eat. She liked to have sex. And this movie does not, to its immense credit, walk away from any of that.
She comes across as a voracious life force.
It sounds like we're kind of jumping around, but this was a deeply episodic movie that went from event to event without a whole lot of connective tissue. Adding that into the disorienting timeline, and you're watching things happen and then something else happens. It's not and then as much as it's sort of, in the next episode of Bessie, we're going to explore an entirely different set of things. And the movie bites off a lot more than it can chew in being episodic, because it does touch on a lot of these cultural issues in different parts of it, but it never quite sticks with any single one of them. That's enormously frustrating. As much as you want to cover off on all of the different things that Bessie Smith represented, this movie cannot pick a lane to save itself.
I watched a short film starring Bessie Smith from 1929 called St. Louis Blues, where she's singing in it for 4 minutes, and it's astounding and better than what we saw here, I'll admit.
So we next go to her hometown, and she reunites with the sister who raised her, the aforementioned Khandi Alexander, who gives a withering glare unlike any that I've ever seen. She's an incredibly talented actress. She was in The Corner. She was on Treme. She's been in a ton of things, and is just cold-hearted in this movie. Her sister is very unexcited to see her, and it's been 10 years. And we find out a little bit more about their dynamic and how her sister raised her and was that person in the beginning of the movie chasing her and screaming at her.
Till they finally give information in this scene that Viola is her older sister, I was having trouble piecing together who is this woman. And Viola is a tough gal.
She's very hard. Next, we go to a party in her hometown where she stands up to a man who is being really inappropriate at the party with another woman, and they kick him out of the party. He waits for her outside the party and stabs her, and she almost dies. We find out a little bit more about that dynamic with her and her sister as she sort of almost like floating in and out of consciousness. She recovers from that, and she gets invited to meet with the founders of Black Swan Records, 3 men who are super tame and are super uncomfortably as very fair-skinned Black men. And they cannot handle her. They appreciate her down-home sound, but it's not a fit for Black Swan Records, is what they tell her. But really what it is she's coarse, she's a belter, and her way of being is doesn't fit with the vision that they want to present, and kind of what the world was accepting from Black artists at the time. This scene kind of touches on, and I would love to dig into it deeper, just this dynamic of being a Black artist in America that's super complex and that I can never possibly understand, which is just this idea that that you need to be acceptable and presentable to white people and safe. We see this continue to this day. O.J. Simpson just passed away, and rewatching O.J. Made in America, you see that this is a dynamic that we continue to struggle with because of how all encompassing the white gaze is. And it's an interesting sequence that, again, I'd like to learn more about.
Another recording contract with Columbia Records. Your royalties mentioned anywhere, and the rest of her career she made around $28,000 in recording fees and never saw a royalty.
I don't like the sound of that.
No.
Is this a good moment to go into the speculation zone with me about what I think happened with the screenplay?
This is a fine moment for it, Sarah.
this is where this scene and how it kind of hopped on to the next thing, which was Bessie chasing the Klan out of a performance and then never talking about that again. It's a really baller scene, but it happens and then we move on from it. So what I started to think about was the original screenplay for this. This movie was, quote, 22 years in the making when it came out. Horton Foote, a man known for occasionally ponderous, genteel Southern drama films and screenplays and writing, wrote the original screenplay for this. Horton Foote is a white man. He was born in 1917. Put that on your board with your red thread. The producers of this film are Richard Zanuck and Lily Feeney Zanuck, two people who have produced a few ponderous Southern dramas themselves. Ramblin' Roses one, and also one Driving Miss Daisy. The Zanucks produced some other Bruce Beresford movies, including Tender Mercies, which Horton Foote also wrote, I believe. Richard Zanuck, do not get me wrong, great film producer, produced Jaws, a career that most people could only dream about. So I'm not trying to insult them. I'm just trying to contextualize that, we've got these two men who are of a certain age and are of a certain standard. Horton Foote wrote this screenplay in a certain time period where biopics really, and then affairs, check the box, move to the next thing, creations of things. He himself wrote things that you couldn't really get inside of. I don't know if you've ever watched The Trip to Bountiful. I had to watch it for a film class, and I got into a fight with my professor about it. But there are movies that you look at and can't get inside of. And that is of that time period. 22 years passes, and they give this to Dee Rees, a filmmaker who was mentored by Spike Lee at NYU. She also has made some incredible movies, including Mudbound. She's done a lot of television, Empire, When We Rise. She's a really talented filmmaker, but you're coming at this from a perspective of this is a different kind of filmmaker than a Horton Foote, Richard Zanuck filmmaker would be. I speculate that this is spiritually a Franken screenplay where we have underneath it the Horton Foote. I could imagine the original screenplay had Bessie Smith being a heterosexual woman. I would go so far as to say that. And I think that, Dee Rees came in and she layered in a lot of philosophical content. I think that scenes that crackle in this, I think scenes like the Black Swan record scene, I think the Ma Rainey content, I think that there's a lot of sort of interesting points that are being made about what it means to be a Black artist in this country. And I think that is to her credit. I don't think that any of this is her error. I think this is the fact that we have 4 screenwriter names on this. And you see the influence of, Dee's understanding of feminist politics. I think you see Dee's influence and understanding of feminist politics and Blackness and queerness in some of these episodic moments. Things just kind of keep moving along in this way that's very similar to a Khandi, or even The Doors, where things happen and then they happen and nothing kind of connects. You've got yourself this chaotic mess where you feel like a spirit of a 2010 era of biopics where it's confrontational and there's a thesis statement and there's kind of a through line coming up against this ponderous mindset and this sort of History Channel recreation that's well acted, but you can't get inside of it. And that's what I think happened.
I think that scans. So what happens?
So she just took down the Klan.
And she was a badass taking down the Klan. She kicks the Klansman, gets his axe that he was trying to chop at her tent with, and threatens him with the axe. That was baller.
Yes, 100%. That was a baller move. And then she just kept on singing.
She gives the axe to a random woman in the audience, which was very nice of her, I thought. I hope that woman treasured that axe for the rest of her days. and used it for whatever she may have needed an axe for.
That is something you display. You put that axe on display and you tell everyone about the time that you watched Bessie Smith chase the Klan out of a concert and then she gave you the axe. You don't use that axe.
If someone's threatening you or your children in honor of Bessie Smith, I would reach for the axe.
Under those circumstances, absolutely. But you don't use that to chop wood or whatever, right? Is that what you do with an axe?
I think that's what you do with an axe.
We then go to a scene where she is at a party in New York and she meets Langston Hughes and also Oliver Platt in one scene playing an Oliver Platt-esque scumbag who is just the perfect depiction of white person from the North.
I believe he's playing a man named Carl Van Vechten, who wrote a book whose title we're not going to display. He took many photographs of African-American artists. It's a party where they have to sing for their supper. The real-life story of this is much better because at the end, Mrs. Van Vechten, who was this tiny woman, got all up in Bessie's face for a kiss, and then Bessie kind of laid her out. It became a huge story around town. But we don't see that here.
Tragically.
Yeah.
He keeps saying things like he keeps giving qualifications that show, how people in the North were just as trash with their view of Black people as people in the South. He calls Langston Hughes our finest Negro poet.
And Bessie, at some point in this scene, says a quote that I don't know who originally said it. At one point, I thought it came from Sammy Davis Jr. I've heard it from Martin Luther King. I don't know who the originator was, but it's this one around the idea that for Black people, that in the South, they don't care how close you get so long as you don't get too high. And in the North, they don't care how high you get so long as you don't get too close. But I've also heard it with the word big instead of high. I do not know who originated this saying or if they're having Bessie say someone else's line 4 decades early.
She then invites her family, all of her family, including her sister, Seal and Jack, and like a whole coterie of folks. And she moves them all into a beautiful house in Philadelphia where they're all going to live together. And Jack's pushing back and he's all, we didn't talk about getting a house. And Bessie is all, this is my money. And discussion over.
Michael K. Williams does a really good job humanizing Jack.
Oh, absolutely. Like his eyes are so evocative. He says so much with his face. You feel sympathy for him, even though you're like, you're kind of not a great guy. But he's also kind of not a great lady. They're both shitty.
How would you rate Jack versus Ted from Respect?
Jack is not a pimp, right?
I don't believe they imply him being a pimp at any point.
Jack is better. I know that Jack has side projects and side pieces, but again, so does Bessie. Like, it is a very balanced relationship in that they both cheat on each other and everything. So I guess he's better than Ted.
Yeah, another Viola scene that passed in here was the one where she comes and meets Bessie on the train, tries on her perfume, and gives her the photo of their mother. So Viola is pretty toxic most of the time, but this is like a peace offering, I guess. It's right before they all move into the big house in Philadelphia. What a fantastic idea to bring all of the toxic and complicated relationships you have in your life all together under one roof to live together happily.
Do you think that this is where MTV got the idea for The Real World, was like reading about Bessie Smith's history?
Sure, but she also meets this bootlegger, Richard.
She takes up with him. I bet that the entire Horton Foote screenplay was about her relationship with this bootlegger versus her relationship with Jack.
A bootlegger, this is the second time we've seen them together, and he says that every relationship in her life is a business relationship. and gives her a 400% refund on all of the booze that she purchased from him. But she has to get home to Jack, and then she introduces him to a kid named Jack Jr. that she just adopted. There's this one touch here that I really like where you see that Jack Jr.'s coat has a price tag sticking out, and she like tucks the tag into the collar. Like she just took him shopping, and she's bringing him home, and she challenges Jack to accept this kid, and he steps up to it. There's another flashback of trauma with her mother, and then some like idyllic scenes of family life with her and Jack and little Jack chasing each other around the house. Then nameless girlfriend, who I know her name is Lucille because you looked it up. I just kept thinking of her as nameless GF or GF the whole time, says, Louie and I are getting married, and Bessie says, who? Which I was wondering about both nameless girlfriend and Louie, but she wants a family. Bessie says nothing and starts to cry. Then we're back at that scene from the beginning of that night when the car comes from her. This is the point where her life starts to unravel, but it's not really traced what the breaking point is. Is it that things were too perfect? Is it Lucille? At some point in here, the bootlegger gave her a bonking ginormous pair of emerald earrings that I think look kind of fake, and I feel bad about thinking they look fake.
No, I also thought they looked fake because I was like, oh, damn, those look like they came out of a crackerjack box. They were very large emeralds. It wasn't the biggest problem I had with this film, but I did notice it and clock it. And I would also just add too, like the 1920s and 30s between this and Annie, talk about a golden age of just being able to snatch a kid off the street and say that they were yours.
Yeah, about the earrings, it's not that they were huge. The color was off, and the sheen was off. The little like traces you expect to see in an emerald were off. Of course, they weren't going to get real emeralds. Most of the time when you see jewelry, it's fake, but they do a better job with it. No, they look like they came out of a crackerjack thing, and that could have been handled better. I've spent a lot of time looking at jewelry. Am I just a snob here? And this is not knowledge that people are expected to have because they never worked for Sotheby's.
Never worked for Sotheby's, and I clocked it. I did. It was noticeable in the measure of the film, especially when I felt like so much of the other costuming and jewelry was very real looking and not obviously fake. I've been around like anything giant and nice in a minute, and I clocked it. So I don't think you're being a snob.
Yeah, big misstep on the part of wardrobe. Unless they're supposed to be fake, but they don't act like it. They act like her pearls are real.
She certainly pawns it for real money.
She and Jack get into a fight because she's wearing the bootlegger's earrings. She chases Viola out. She's passed out on the floor. Jack comes to take Jack Jr. and tells her she's an unfit mother. Viola instigated the whole thing. There's one point where Viola's sitting there drinking tea because, of course, she let him in. Bessie's crying in bed. We can finally sort of piece the timeline together because, like you said, it's obvious when the Great Depression starts. But what's your assessment of this whole sequence?
First of all, I thought Jack's not wrong for kidnapping that kid. He clearly was the one doing a bit more nurturing of that child. And Bessie is in no condition to care for a child. I don't know what Jack's home life looked like at that point, but that's not a bad idea to get that kid out of there. I think it's also worth noting here, too, there is a sequence that, that people would call brave, where Queen Latifah sits fully nude in front of a mirror for a long time. It's the kind of nudity that bothers people who get bothered by nudity that isn't there to get them turned on, and the direction that her life is taking and how tired and abject she is feeling. I thought that was interesting.
She's lost the house, and Clarence shows up because he's been there for her the whole time. He's moving her to some sort of I couldn't tell if it's a boarding house or an apartment with a really pathetic looking stove. She's pawning her jewels, including the enormous, are they or aren't they, emeralds from the bootlegger. Clarence is trying to cheer her up. There's bottles at the foot of the bed. She's sick, but Clarence is there with. He was there with her at the beginning. He's there with her at the end, and he's taking her back to see Ma Rainey, who we did see swaying to like one of Bessie's records that she only got the fee and not the royalty for, to show that like Ma has moved on too. In between, he tells her it's their last ride in the fancy car because they're going to have to sell that too. And Ma forgives her. They love each other again. And Ma is reading from a pretentious Vanity Fair article by Oliver Platt's character, praising Ethel Waters, and says that she wants to write a response to his book and title it Cracker Hell, which I loved.
Oh, damn. Monique is so good. Like, she came back and I was like, oh, thank you, God. Monique is here. And she's going to make this lively and interesting. And I think, like, to your point about her listening to Bessie's album, like she was a businesswoman through and through. You know, she understood why she would want to move on, and see some really joyous moments of them singing together.
Heals her, and she tells Bessie that she was trying to fill a hole that whole time. Another note on mixed signals of passage of time, but she's back in Philadelphia at a party, and her bootlegger Richard shows up to give her back the earrings, and I was like, what? How did he know what pawn shop to go to? Was he stalking her while she pawned the emeralds? How did he know this? And I can believe that he heard around she was having this party and showed up, but I don't know how long those emeralds were sitting in the pawn shop, or how he even knew what pawn shop to go to. It's too annoying for me to find it romantic. It's just not good script writing. It wasn't necessary. I'm not mad at him. I'm mad at the screenwriter, and I'm mad at whoever the wardrobe coordinator was who picked out those fake-looking emeralds over any other piece they could have chosen, or perhaps the camera person for not putting a better gel on the camera. Shut me up, Sarah.
I will. There's a lot of blame to be spread around. I also just had this realization. So Dee Rees was mentored by Spike Lee, and Richard Zanuck produced Driving Miss Daisy. Do you think this was like a proxy war, relitigating the Driving Miss Daisy versus Do the Right Thing battle of 1989? Is this where those two things come together?
Very good insight, Sarah. Zanuck dead by the time that Bessie is produced.
Horton Foote was dead.
I mean, don't blame Dee Rees for wanting to waltz on his grave, given what he might have stood for to her. And silly me, I'm mostly getting heated about those frickin' fake-looking emeralds.
You're a very reasonable person, and you're being very reasonable about the emeralds. I just let shit slide this way and that way, and I gave praise to the people in Caligula. I clocked the earrings. I'm willing to say that the blame should be spread around. I don't want to hold one person responsible for the existence of those earrings, because there's a chain of decision making that happened there that allowed those to get onto the film. And as someone once said about something more important, evil is allowed to happen when good men do nothing.
Who thought these tacky, fake-looking emerald earrings looked good?
Maybe it's a thing like in American Sniper where they had that plastic baby where someone was like, fuck it, this is going to have to do.
I haven't seen American Sniper.
I don't know if it's going to qualify, because I don't think he was really famous before.
Let's wrap
this up. It wasn't bad. It was episodic, and it's a frustrating movie because it's another movie where I'm like, Why aren't all these people working all the time? Why am I not about to turn on my TV and see Monique on every channel? That's just one person. Khandi Alexander is another, where I don't understand why I'm not always watching them and things.
Back into Bessie. Clarence has finally somehow developed business sense, even though it was not so great for most of the film, and he brings Bessie an example of something called a party record, which even she thinks the lyrics are nasty. And here comes, this is something that will happen to us where we see characters played by different actors in different films. It is our second John Hammond sighting. A 3 decades older version of him was in Aretha, but at this point he's in his 20s. John Hammond, unnecessarily, may I add, because he had a genuinely brilliant career, kind of put himself in the white savior role a few times. It's not great. This is the first time we'll have seen someone pop up multiple times. It's also going to happen to us again when we get to Rocket Man next week, where John Reed is also a character in Bohemian Rhapsody, which we are getting to this year, I swear. It's 1933, so oh good, we finally know the year again. John Hammond mentions that he saw Bessie 6 years ago. He says that seeing her changed his life. He basically offers her the sun, the moon, and the stars, and she is back in Columbia Records, but the scene looks much more respectful now. Benny Goodman pops up. I forgot to mention last week, Milk, first film about a Jew. But yeah, this is not a film about Benny Goodman. He's just cameoing. And she finally pays that visit to her mother's grave.
That sequence felt like there was a pause there for applause, like he was in a play. Said, I'm John Hammond. And I thought, am I supposed to applaud? I didn't, obviously, but it felt like a fan servicey moment for all the John Hammond heads out there, of which I'm sure there are tens of them. Or maybe that was just me. We close out with her hanging out with Richard Morgan, who would become her lifelong companion.
But there's a flashback to her being happy with her mother. Always the signifier that someone's inner turmoil is now resolved, but it's unclear what went wrong with the mother, or why Viola blamed her. Also, John Hammond told her he's opening a club where he says there'll be no balconies, no segregation. He says to her that this club will be integrated. We see her singing. I don't know if this is supposed to be a different venue and they're just not following up on John Hammond's promise of an integrated club, because she's singing on a big glamorous stage, so there's this idea that she's back. But when the camera goes out to the audience, it's white in the orchestra and black in the balcony. When he had said to her, no color lines, no balconies, was John Hammond lying to her? And I went back and I rewound this and I was like, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing, where they're not following through? It looked very much like John Hammond was just not following through on how he was going to run this club, or it was a totally different club that was still segregated. John Hammond means different club that we don't visit for running time.
It is weird that he said, I'm gonna desegregate a club, and then we immediately go to a club that is absolutely not desegregated. Yeah, that is weird that happened. Maybe it was more something that's down the road that's a goal, and that was just a performance somewhere else or something.
Yeah, I assume this probably isn't going to be the last time we see John Hammond on a film.
He's so interesting, so I can't wait to see him again. That's pitchy. He's probably way more interesting than I am. He's done a lot more. He's always surrounded by interesting people. I will give him that.
We see Bessie and Richard on the back of a truck talking about what's coming next. They seem happy, although this is sort of perhaps an ominous hint at how Bessie would die, which is not in this film, and I'm fine with it, because the way that somebody dies, even if it's horrible, isn't their whole life. There was a whole thing about conflicting stories on how Bessie Smith died, where John Hammond heard one thing, which was that she died because the ambulances wouldn't take her to the White Hospital. When an ambulance did arrive, it took her directly to the Black Hospital. That was what the driver would have done. I have no idea what the mileage difference was between the White Hospital and the Black Hospital. Hammond found a good story and ran with it. There has been much controversy about the full story of this, which you can look up.
One of the pieces of IMDb trivia was, interestingly, this movie didn't deal with Bessie Smith's controversial death. And I thought, interestingly, not every movie has to end that way. Like, we don't always have to get to the plane crash where someone died. There's other interesting things that happen to all sorts of people that don't always have the part where they died, the most compelling part of this story.
Would have thrown everything off, because this is a story of a woman finding her artistic soul, losing it and coming back to it and dealing with her demons, and she reaches a place of peace that, so far as we know, was how she spent her last few happy years. Bessie did get to see her kid again, but that's not in here. We're left with, she's at peace, her life is moving in a good direction. I don't need to see her bleeding out from a car crash.
I don't need to see people die. It's all good. One thing that I liked about this that I respected too is that I didn't feel like she's clean and she's sober and she's gonna live a perfectly healthy life from now on. I felt like she cuddled things with her demons, but she didn't necessarily let go of them, or like come to a place where she was like, everything's gonna be okay now. She got square with herself and who she was as an artist and who she was as a woman of appetite. But she didn't necessarily decide that all of that had to be let go of.
I wrote down a few pieces of choice dialogue from the Franken script, as you so aptly called it. The blues is not about people knowing you. It's about you knowing people. Then, I auditions whoever I please. And, I want another velvet box. Jack gave her a very nice velvet box. Later on, the bootlegger gave her some fake-looking emeralds.
You grabbed my one line that I really loved, which was the blues isn't about people knowing you. It's about you knowing people. All of Ma Rainey's lessons about performance were really incredibly powerful and timeless. I also want to be clear too. The Franken script theory is entirely my own fiction. I don't that's just my guess. It's all speculative fiction. It's me with my tinfoil hat and my board with my red threads.
Want to rate it?
Yeah, might as well.
Outward appearances.
I gave it a 9. I think everyone looked great and accurate. And looked like their characters.
Oh gosh, I gave it a 6 and I have no idea how to defend this now.
It's okay. Acting and casting. I gave it an 8. Everyone did a really good job. I think Latifah was too old for the role, but she looked great and she sounded great. Monique is a queen. She is so amazing and energized and real as Ma Rainey, and she also looks like her, but also brought all of her own energy to the role. This is just Murderer's Row of incredibly talented performers. Khandi Alexander, as I mentioned, Michael K. Williams. I mean, my God, what? It's so awful that he's gone. He was such a talented, singular, unique performer. And fucking gifted. I hate that he died. Charles S. Dutton, not enough Charles S. Dutton ever. He's a really great presence. Oliver Platt, also great and completely unlikable in this movie. You know, short performances, but striking ones that stuck with you. What about you on acting and casting?
I gave a 7.5, mostly for Michael K. Williams and for Monique. Queen Latifah doesn't age at all through the film, and she's 20 years too old at the start. At least they narrowed in on about a 20-year period, but It's like she's the same age the whole way. And there were characters where the actors may have been reasonably talented, but the script was doing them no favors, like Nameless GF.
Age shifts. I gave it a 4. As I said, I didn't have any handle on what time it was, how much time had gone by at any given moment. There were like little mile markers and breadcrumbs that I was able to recognize because I am wicked smart, as you know. I know what a scene about the Great Depression looks like, as I mentioned, and I have a vague idea of when Langston Hughes was out and about and things like that, but it's so hazy. The timing is so hazy, and the way that the film was structured, I didn't know whether I was coming or going.
I copy-pasted wrong into the run of show. Age shifts is the category we changed the name of to Passage of Time. I'm just going to let everyone know that I fucked up. Passage of Time, I gave it a 5. Costuming, I gave it a 7. It was a passable enough effort. It didn't stun me. Like what you said with Milk last week, that you could feel the swish of the polyester suits. Or in Respect, there were one that I looked and thought, wow, I want that. I want to get in a time machine so I can wear that. It was a decent, possible job. So I gave it a 7.
And those earrings. Costuming, I gave it a 6 for all the same reasons that you did it. Some of the costumes felt really costumey to me. Like the feathers or like the sequins or things like that. I can almost see the Party City tags on a couple of items. That said, and you mentioned Respect also, where I felt like watching Respect, if I walked up to any one of those costumes and flipped it over, I would see sewing that was replicated from a 1960 Singer sewing machine. This movie didn't have that level of authenticity. Maybe that's unfair of me, but you know what? This is our podcast. I did think that everything was beautifully fitted. The men's suits were excellent, but it didn't rise to levels that we have seen already. Quality of the script, I gave it a 5 because it tapped on so many different social issues that were really interesting and are really important, but then would walk away from them. The script doesn't hang together. It's episodes. That's because there's 4 screenwriters. It was like a Voltron where different parts were bolted on with different ideas at different times. And Horton, Foote, and I have problems. You feel the tear of time between when this was originally written and who it was originally written by, and then who took over the project. And the movie just feels like it is in constant conflict between those two things. So yeah, 5. I love Dee Rees though. I really love her, and I'm sad to say anything mean about her.
Everybody has an off film where you can see the handprint. I saw Spike Lee's She Hate Me, and I could see that it was made by the same person who made Do the Right Thing. So much wrong going on. It's okay to not like everything someone does. Quality of the script, I also gave a 5. There was some good dialogue in there. Part of the issues with Passage of Time came from that script not articulating. And this doesn't need to be done in a way where you see years or where people are constantly saying the economy is sure taking a downturn in this year of our Lord 1930 following the crash of the stock market last autumn. People can do this well. So quality of the script, I gave it a 5. Accuracy, I gave a 5 as well. More accurate than Caligula. So much great stuff they didn't use. So much they amalgamated poorly. 5 is average. 5 is not bad.
Accuracy, I gave a 6. These were all people who were real, with the exception of her girlfriend. Generally, these things all happened. So accurate enough. That said, as you pointed out, a lot of interesting stuff was left on the floor. And I think that also the focus on some accuracy kind of lended itself to the episodic quality because of the way life flows. So yeah, 6. Average. You're right.
Average means it was a perfectly enjoyable thing to watch. They didn't make the best choices, I thought, around what to take and what to leave. That was reflected in storytelling, where I gave a 5.
Same.
Production value, I gave a 7. I thought that the scenery looked good.
Same. Everything did look good. I gave it an 8. The cars were all beautiful. And there was one thing that I did want to mention too, in the scene where she's going into the apartment after she's lost her house. Latifah does some acting in that scene where she's just touching things and trying to make them fit nicely. But also, I was really struck by the look and feel of everything in that apartment. And there were real people in the scenes in the theaters, and it looked reasonably well designed. Production and direction decision making. As I said, my tinfoil hat theory, I gave this a 5. There were a lot of things that were compromised on, a lot of changes layered over changes. Didn't like the things they left out, didn't like the threads that they didn't pull on harder. I sense an artistic frustration in this film that Rees wasn't allowed to go all the places that she wanted to, that she was kind of hampered by a very strong producer hand. As a result of that, gave it a 5.
Production and direction decision making, I gave it a 5.5. And when I look at our costuming and production value scores, I think we've grown much fairer than when we deducted full points for the shade of Dew's hair, although those earrings, those had a total of about 4 or 5 scenes. It wasn't like having to look at Dew's hair every time he walks into a scene.
Yeah, those earrings were as important to this film as that creepy little ghost boy in Milk who hands him the Dan White pamphlet. They are pivotal and meaningful, but ultimately they are not something that is being used to sell you on a notion of a person being a certain character who they look nothing like.
For Do We Care, I gave it a 5.5.
Do you have anything else to say about that?
It was middling. It had some very strong points. It was an enjoyable watch. Most of the time, we're not going to have a strong enough reaction for it to call for second opinion. This is normal. My average came to 5.85, above perfectly average.
First, Do We Care? I gave it a 5. I liked learning more about Bessie Smith. I admittedly didn't know a lot about her coming into this movie. This movie didn't go as far as I would have liked it to in order to make me care, and it was an incredibly formulaic biopic. It is all the things that we talked about a biopic being when it comes to tropes. As a result, I was kind of like, I know where this is going already. In terms of, the mom and everything. And like, I get that, tropes happen for a reason, but I felt like I knew how this was all going to turn out before it ended. I struggled to care about this depiction of Bessie Smith, despite how good Queen Latifah was. And she was very good, and was very compellingly dislikable and complicated. But I felt like we never quite got inside of what made her the way that she was. They showed us a couple things that could tell us what she, what moved her and what motivated her, but I didn't feel like I ever got a real sense of that. And this movie felt very remote to me. I think that's just because of the movie that it was. I don't think that is because of a bad performance. So 5, and my average came out to a 5.5. So right smack dab in the middle.
The average comes to 5.675. Perfectly acceptable, even we'd say. Slightly above average. What else do we have to say to close? There's no second opinion this time.
It was fine. Is there anything that you would recommend people do instead of it? Like watch that 3-minute clip that you found on YouTube?
Yeah, the 4-minute excerpt of Bessie Smith, the real Bessie Smith, singing in St. Louis Blues is fantastic.
Also looking up your YouTube clip and watching Do the Right Thing instead of ever watching Driving Miss Daisy. And this isn't not worth watching. I think that there's things about this that are really interesting and could make for a splendid evening at home should you have the time. But if you have to pick a movie, just don't watch A Trip to Bountiful.
It's a perfectly acceptable, enjoyable film to watch while crocheting, if that's your jam, or eating popcorn. This was not a bad score. We'll see you next time when we'll be continuing Pride Month with Rocket Man, which we're excited for because it's the first of the big musical biopics of the last 2 decades. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
I do not. Just simply rate and review us on iTunes. Give us a 5-star review. Tell a friend. We hear it helps. Have a great week. Thanks for listening. I am excited for Rocket Man, the superior movie about a gay British musical artist that came out that year.
We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.